Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another Learning with National Leaders virtual event presented by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes-Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. I'll be your host tonight, Randy Naughton. We really appreciate you joining us. Now, tonight is a special event because our cancer topic is all about clinical trials. We'll be discussing the impact and importance of clinical trials like those offered at Siteman Cancer Center. We'll also be addressing any misconception and we'll be answering your viewer questions. So if you have any questions about clinical trials, get them ready. We'll let you know when you can submit them. Now, before I welcome our guests, I want to start with some important statistics when it comes to clinical trials. Now, Siteman Cancer Center patients have access to more than 500 clinical trials designed to assess the effectiveness of innovative cancer treatments. Now, in the last 5 years at Siteman, more than 62,000 participants have been involved in these clinical research studies. Of those 62,000 participants, more than 21,000 have been a part of an interventional research study, and almost 8,000 have participated in trials evaluating new cancer therapies based on current estimates. The number of patients participating in clinical trials at Siteman Cancer Center for lung, breast, genitourinary, and gastrointestinal cancers will increase 30% from 2022 to 2023. Now, a reminder to those of you who have not joined one of our Learning with National Leaders events, you can submit your questions right here on this website, and we'll try to get those answers for you live throughout the duration of our discussion. We're really glad you're here tonight. Now we're going to introduce our panelists. Joining us tonight are two Washington University physicians from Siteman Cancer Center, gynecological oncologist and surgeon Dr. Premel Thaker and medical oncologist Nikolas Trikalinos. Welcome to you both. We appreciate you both for joining us. We're going to get started with you, Dr. Thaker. Now, when physicians bring up perhaps a clinical trial to a patient, what exactly are they talking about? Because obviously a patient with cancer is, you know, their head is reeling and you say, well, this might work. What is a clinical trial?
Right, so I completely agree. When you're first faced with a diagnosis of cancer, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
But the great thing is that a clinical trial can give you novel new options. So therapies that are hopefully cutting edge. You know, I tell patients that the clinical trials that we offer you hopefully will become the next standard of care. And so the real importance is to realize that it gives an opportunity that otherwise you may not get in the community. So there's different types of clinical trials. So clinical trials can be like interventional clinical trials, or they can be non-interventional. So what we mean by that is sometimes interventions are drugs, novel new therapies or drugs. It can also be advancing technology, like new radiation therapies that we can offer patients that are not available in communities. Some of them can also be interventions to sort of complement your treatments. So they can be interventions like exercise or lifestyle. So there's lots of different types of clinical trials. So it's really important for the patient to understand what type we're talking about, because we have such an offering, like you mentioned in the opening.
So many.
With how many participants we have, and so we have a lot of variety. So a lot of patients can participate in clinical trials at different parts of their journey, because some patients are very scared when they first get diagnosed and may think that's too overwhelming. But I'd really encourage patients to talk with their physicians about the benefits of clinical trials.
And so their participation, what can it mean overall for the patient? Let's talk about their mental health. I mean, do they feel better about it, generally speaking? Are they more hopeful? How do they react?
Yeah, so I think it depends with a lot of what your circumstances of what you come to the sort of visit with. Some patients are a little bit hesitant because they're just like, are you experimenting on me, or are you really offering me something cutting edge, right? And that's natural because you're so overwhelmed, so many emotions. So I think first is having support in order to make a good decision, because I always tell people having several sets of ears is much better than just coming by yourself.
Right.
And then on top of it, I think what's important is talking about what it could benefit. So we all are optimistic when we give patients options for clinical trials that we're really going to benefit the patient. So hopefully they'll get better and improved care, because we also are watching you very, very carefully through trials if you're eligible for them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later about this. because really there's a lot of security measures to make sure that you get extra testing, you get even more supports. We're lucky that we have lots of nursing support and psychologists, like you said, for your mental health through this. But this sort of, you get a research staff on top of it helping you and guiding you through, because if most people have seen the Siteman Cancer Center, it's a big center, and we definitely want patients to be able to navigate it easily and be able to feel comfortable.
So if a patient does say, yes, I want to be on board with this, I want to do a clinical trial, how ultimately can that help other patients?
Yeah, so it can definitely help first the patient themselves, because we want to obviously help them first. But I would say a lot of the sort of trials that we participate in are usually national and some of our international trials. So they really can change the standard of care for not only us here in the community regionally, but even make huge impacts. And I always tell patients the treatments we give you as what we think is standard of care is because patients really ahead of you were so brave to participate in clinical trials. Because I wish there was some like holy grail to say this is what you need, but it's really because of the real generosity of patients ahead of you who gave back by participating in a clinical trial.
And it's all patient dependent because not every patient is the same, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right, and what about the standard of care you talked about? Some people might be hesitant and they might say, I'm not so sure I'm gonna get the top care that I would expect from this facility, but it's just the opposite.
It is the opposite. So, at the worst, you're gonna get standard of care, which you would be offered anywhere, and hopefully you'll be, the other part of clinical trials, which we didn't mention, is randomization, because we don't necessarily as clinicians get to choose, since a lot of times these trials are being done in so many different centers that they're randomized to a particular, whether you get standard of care or do you get the standard of care plus something else. So, I don't want patients to get disappointed, because at the worst you're gonna do is get standard of care.
All right, and I see Dr. Trikalinos he's agreeing with a lot of what you were saying.
We all agree. Yeah.
You all agree, right? And we want to talk about the promising news about clinical trials coming out of your facility. What can you tell us about what is happening now and what's coming up?
So Siteman is a very big university, and obviously there's tons of clinical trials, both interventional and not. I'll talk about cancer a little bit, and that has something to do with, it's very, very personal for me because I come from a family of cancer patients. When I was training, we found out about immunotherapy for the first time, and that's where your body learns how to treat the cancer with treatments that we give are not chemotherapy. They're teaching your body how to identify and eradicate the cancer. So immunotherapy over time has morphed into many different ways. And what I saw more recently, which is very surprising, is that immunotherapy can actually take away the need for other treatments. So a very big example that most of you may have heard about is in rectal cancer patients with a very specific mutation or mutation load. Those people end up not needing radiation, not needing chemotherapy, and just getting immunotherapy, which is much more comfortable, has fewer side effects. So I like the fact that sometimes science allows us to de-escalate treatment and make it a little bit less harsh on people. Another thing that surprised me recently about clinical trials very pleasantly is KRAS targeting. Without going into a lot of details, when I was training in medical school, I was told that this mutation that's the end. It's a powerful, nasty mutation, makes cancers very aggressive. It's not targetable. You cannot use half of the drugs that you want to use because of this mutation. We were taught to fear this mutation. Now, lo and behold, 20, 30 years later, we have drugs that can actually target that mutation. Govindan ran a national study that actually showed that this mutation now it's not bad news, it may actually be good news because you have a drug for that.
That's pretty incredible.
And it's a tiny bit of patients that have this, but all of a sudden, the seal has broken and more different drugs targeting slightly different mutations are coming out. So that's exciting for me, having something that was terrorizing me now being, a source of encouragement. And
are you able to give a timeline as to when the KRAS mutation might be available?
So the KRAS mutation is a test that has always been available, but the drugs that target that are very recent, and more are sprouting out for many different types of mutations. All I'm trying my point is that, science and research has the ability to take what's really terrifying and make it, exciting, exhilarating. Same for people with high mutational burden, where immunotherapy actually helps. And it's, I want to highlight one of the studies that is done here at Washington University. It's by Dr. Lim, one of my colleagues. So he spent most of his life working on a cancer pathway that is targetable. It took him 20 years to do that, but we have a drug now. He's one of the national experts, actually one of the world experts in that. And now he's bringing that to the clinical world. He's combining that with chemotherapy. It's a drug called CA4948. You don't need to know the details, but it's exciting news because all of a sudden we see what worked, what cured cancer in the laboratory, actually apply to patients. This is an ongoing study. Pancreatic cancer is a terrible cancer. It's just horrifying. We've done pretty much nothing, over the last 20 years, maybe a couple of drug regimens, and I know it firsthand. It killed my father, 20 years ago. So I'm excited to see things that actually make a difference. This is what gets us excited about clinical trials. That's why we're here today, to be
I can see the passion and hear the passion in your voice. It's pretty amazing. Clinical trials, I understand there are 4 types of them. Tell us what they are. What are they?
We'll mainly focus on what we call interventional trials, new medications, let's put it this way. So say that, you discovered a new drug that obviously in the laboratory looks great. You want to see how well it works, in humans, but you have to make that jump. So that's where the first phase of clinical trials happens. You just try it in a few humans who obviously, have cancer and want treatment, but you just don't know how well it works and you don't know how well it's tolerated. You probably have some idea from your studies in animals, but humans are not animals. So phase 1 studies allow us to figure out how safe that drug is. We give it in escalating doses, find out where it tends to cause more trouble than not, and that's when you can move your drug onto the second phase. In the second phase, phase 2 trials, usually you include a lot more patients, about 50 to 100 patients, and then you're looking for efficacy. You're looking for the drug, a cancer drug, for example. Does it kill cancer as well as it's supposed to? And do those side effects that you noticed on your early trials, do they continue? Do you find more of these? And if the phase 2 trial passes the test, if your patients really are benefiting from the drug, then you go to phase 3 trials where you get excited. You're like, maybe this is the new standard of care. Maybe we should have that drug fight against what we already know is working. So these trials are much bigger. They're hundreds of patients. And if those turn out to be successful, if patients are really benefiting from that, then you have an FDA approval, you have a drug that's in the market, and you're almost done. But you're not really done because we never know. Because we never know what the drug does. I keep learning things about the drugs all the time. I mean, you can buy ibuprofen, and I never knew ibuprofen can make you sleepy. It makes me sleepy. So there are side effects that a lot of people don't experience, but you have to really look into what happens once the drug comes out, once the drug is approved. So the phase 4 trials, the post-marketing studies are mandated by the FDA to ensure that the drug doesn't have any other unexpected side effects, because people are different. And once you try it in more than 100 people, and once thousands of people have gotten it, you might discover something that you don't like. It's very rare that you'll find something that's horrifying and requires you to withdraw the drug. It has happened a few times in the past, thankfully, but it adds to the safety. So there's a whole lot of control and a lot of phases. Those things can easily take years.
That's pretty incredible. And you mentioned the one with 20 years. How do you know, if you see a patient, how do you know they are a good fit for a clinical trial?
So a patient is never a fit for a trial. A trial is a fit for a patient.
Oh, thank you for clarifying.
Sorry.
Explain.
This and the other thing that people say, the patient failed, the treatment just gets on my nerves, because I have, both of my parents were cancer patients. So a patient may be eligible for a trial if a patient wants to be on a trial. So simply, if they want to, if they feel that they can dedicate the time, if they can deal with the uncertainty, then that's the biggest hurdle. If your patient is interested in joining a clinical trial, then comes our part, seeing if what the patient has is something that we can help with, if there are indications that can help us with the specific scenario that we have in hand. And there's a laundry list of requirements. Yeah. Most of the times we try to have people who, are in relatively okay shape. They don't have to be like playing pickleball or anything like that, but they have to be in appropriately good shape, because at the end of the day, a clinical trial is supposed to help, but we don't know if it will help. But
Everybody's different, right?
But you're not supposed to be harming anybody. So
Right.
having a patient that is probably not healthy enough to be on an investigational clinical trial is an absolute no-no. So a lot of times we'll have to, ask patients not to be on a trial, even though we're excited about being them on one, because it just doesn't work. A recent example I have is, a patient that's in excellent shape. The clinical trial had a requirement that they should never have had an inflammation of their heart. That patient had something happen to them 60 years ago. It was enough for us to say, no, they shouldn't be, because even if there's a little bit of a concern that something that we give may harm somebody.
So patient safety is prioritized, no doubt.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
We hope that we help somebody, but we absolutely have to be sure that we do not harm somebody.
All right.
I just wanted to add one
Yes,
other
doctor.
thing. I think the other part for clinical trials is we want to also be very inclusive. Yes, we definitely want to save patients and their safety, but I think one of the things historically we haven't done as good of a job is trying to get a very diverse population.
Yeah, absolutely.
So meaning, different ages, different even genders, different sort of ethnicities, because, we definitely know there's differences in how every human body works and maybe processes these drugs and how they also may react. And we want to get as much information, so we also think it's applicable, the information we get from clinical trials, to everyone.
That is really a good point you just made. We do want to get to some viewer questions. We have some folks submitting them right now. One of the questions is, how do clinical trials even get started? Either one of you can take it.
Sure. So clinical trials, I tell everyone, is a labor of love on an investigator, because it definitely takes a lot of effort, and there's multiple steps. So one is a lot of clinical trials are done through the National Cancer Institute. And others are done through pharmaceutical companies, and even a lot of us are fortunate enough to even write clinical trials, and we've been able to just enact them in our own communities. So they make them only unique to us, which is great, because that gives us a lot of sort of the science that we can use our labs to try to supplement what are those, sort of breakthroughs, or why it's not working too, on the flip side. So clinical trials, once we sort of develop a protocol, it goes through several review committees for really human safety, to make sure it's okay, and then we actually get, informed consent approvals, and there's lots of what we call regulatory to make sure we get accurate data. So there's lots of steps, and then we also want to follow patients. So it's not only while you're actively receiving the treatments, but we want to know how you're doing afterwards as well. So we do ask patients to sort of let us follow them, so we know how they're doing side effect-wise, survival. These are all important. So that's why I think it's very important for patients to realize the time component, because even though the cost is not there, since it's approved through insurance, and we make sure the cost is minimized, if at all, for patients, it's really the time commitment, because you may be filling in surveys for us to make sure that we're capturing all the side effects. Because when you meet with us, we ask you our pertinent side effects, but maybe you're having something that we haven't asked, or how you're feeling. Because you're one snapshot in time when you're sitting with your doctor, but you're really taking this at home, and your family may be noticing things,
Right.
or other parts.
You mentioned time. What is the average length of a clinical trial for a particular patient? Is there one, or is everybody different?
So it really varies based on the treatment and the intervention, because some of our drugs can take short, like immunotherapy, or shorter durations of sort of how much you need to get. But a lot of times we also are doing additional studies, like trying to draw extra blood vials. So there can be a little bit of a discomfort for a patient, but it's also to help benefit you as well as hopefully others. So I can't say there's an average time for each patient, because some of them are very variable. Some are really short. Yeah. Sometimes it's more time intensive initially, and then it gets less, because we sort of know that you're doing fine and you don't need as long of a visit with us. But I think all of that's discussed with the patient up front when we inform them about not only risks of the trial, but also what are those commitments, like how often am I going to have to come, maybe miss work, or have to make arrangements for my child, or other things. So we do try to make it not just only the medical part, but also trying to take in your whole, I guess, your environment and what else needs to be done, because we realize it takes a village, right, to take care of patients from both the family side, in addition to us as physicians
Right.
and our whole team, because we have nutritionists, we have psychologists, we have nurses. I mean, it's, we're just sitting up here as we are the clinical trials, but it's really, it's a whole labor of individuals.
It's a collaborative effort from everybody.
Yes.
How important is that, Dr. Trikalinos, for the patient to be involved with that village?
I mean, it's important for many different aspects. I mean, we want collaboration with our patients. Remember, most of our clinical trials are about finding out the truth. What do our interventions, what is the outcome of our interventions on a patient's life, and what can we expect to teach other people once the trial is done? So we do want the patient actively involved. We do have a big group, as Dr. Thaker mentioned, of nutritionists, psychologists, pain management. Our nurses are excellent, our clinical research coordinators, and all of them just collect information, make sure that the patient is safe, and they're reporting everything. One of the things that some people complain in a clinical trial is, oh my God, you guys keep bugging me about the same things again and again. If we know what the treatment is doing, and someone comes in and says, I'm having a cough today, but I have allergies this time of the year, we will discount that. But if someone's on a clinical trial, the moment they say they're coughing, we're like, okay, hold up, this is the drug. When did you start coughing? Are you still coughing now? And we have to ascribe all of those, as symptoms to the drug or not, because we have to teach others later on.
That's why you ask all the questions.
So we ask a lot of questions and can get on someone's nerves on occasion. Most people appreciate that, but it is a little bit more intense, and that's all for safety. That's the reality. And we encourage people to let us know anything that they notice or that their family notices, because sometimes we get surprised ourselves, pleasantly or obviously unpleasantly. And
but it's all information coming your way that you need.
Yeah, once someone understands that the clinical trial obviously is testing the efficacy but also the safety of an intervention, becomes so much important that the patient has an open line of communication. And we encourage them, say, whatever you feel, let us know. Sometimes they joke about it. They say, yeah, I had a little bit of headache, but I was fighting with my spouse. It's fine. Okay, so probably not related to the drug, but it's something that we really need to know.
So why should a patient even consider receiving care in a clinical trial from a place like Siteman? And Dr. Thaker mentioned a cost, if any. What is the general cost other than the time and all the surveys and all the questions?
So someone should consider being on a clinical trial because they're looking for something different, something better. And sometimes this may involve a situation where things are critical and horrifying, like a very aggressive cancer. Then absolutely, you're looking for that next best option. And sometimes you're looking for a twist, something to make your treatment more pleasant or more light. Because there are those trials that de-escalate treatment, trials that take away treatment or make it easier on people, and people get attracted to that. Some people get attracted to the idea that there will be an academic center where a lot of eyes will be on them. For us, obviously, it's a different story. A clinical trial is our lifeline. We're good at what we do, and some of us are excellent at what we do, but the reality is there's a limit to what we can do. We can cure, for example, some cancers. We cannot cure some others. So anything that's new, anything that's an incremental level of knowledge above what we know gets us excited. You should see us when we get a new protocol, because they all come, with all that data that says that cancer gets exterminated in mice and cells. Like, is that going to be the new thing? So we're actively, excited about what else comes out.
And that leads me to my next question for Dr. Thaker. How important are these clinical trials in future treatments of cancer and cancer care?
Well, I think it's more than important. It's like essential, right? It's really what we thrive on, but more importantly, if we want to, quote, get rid of cancer or make this sort of just curable for all, or maybe tolerable for all, we really need clinical trials.
I'm with curable.
We're curable, right? He and I are both passionate. We're like, we're going to cure this and be able to get rid of it. We need clinical trials. I mean, that is so important. And what we're also learning is the biology, because a lot of times we used to think only this cancer had, like he mentioned, a KRAS mutation. Now I can tell you in my low-grade ovarian cancer patients, there's KRAS mutations, and we use the same similar drugs. So we're also learning a lot about how there is a lot of sort of cross-pollination, if you want to say, about these important pathways. So when we talk about precision oncology or really trying to fit the treatment for the patient, we only can do this with sort of getting these drugs into clinical trials and then available to all. And so we're making, huge strides. And I think, as we mentioned, there's sort of a clinical trial for all, right? You need to come to us, and if you're interested, we will find something
and that was going to be the next question. I understand there are like 500 of them listed on the Siteman website. So if somebody watching this right now and is saying, you know what, this might be the thing for me, what is their next step? What do they do to get involved?
Sure. So, the Siteman website is wonderful because it actually has a phone number that you can call and even refer yourself, because a lot of patients think that they had to have their physician refer them. Yeah. And we definitely have a lot of patients who refer themselves, and then we have navigators who can look at sort of their records and see if there is a potential availability, but you must discuss this with your treating physician because they know you very well. And if they think you're a candidate and you are in agreement, then I think that's the best way to sort of proceed.
Yeah, and we do want to let our viewers know that if you click on the QR code that you see on your screen, that will link you to the website that will take you to all of that information. We want to get to a couple of more questions. Is there a particular clinical trial that either one of you can remember? It started as a clinical trial, but now it is a common care for cancer. Anything jump to mind?
I'll let you answer first.
Sure. So I think myself and Dr. Powell and all our colleagues in GYN oncology are super excited that we participated in a clinical trial that really became FDA approved and now is the standard of care, which is adding immunotherapy to standard of care chemotherapy. So we've always given, quote, Taxol and carboplatin as our chemotherapy backbone, but we added either dostarlimab or pembrolizumab. So these are just immunotherapy options for patients with advanced endometrial cancer or recurrent endometrial cancer. And I think it's made huge headlines, and we're extending life with this, and we're very proud that we could offer it to our patients here. But it's also a national and an international trial. Dr. Powell, my partner, was actually the national PI and is off in Korea right now giving talks on this. So we're really excited when we can sort of bring those here, but also make a global impact with this.
That's pretty awesome. And what about you, doctor? Anything jump to mind?
I mean, I see patients with neuroendocrine tumors. It's a very rare neoplasm, so not a lot of treatments for those patients because there wasn't a lot of attention on those, but people are motivated now, so a good amount of clinical trials, and one of them was the cabinet trial. It used cabozantinib, a small molecule that essentially can stop multiple cancer-growing pathways without going into a ton of details. That trial just resulted. So we put a lot of patients on it. It's a multi-institutional trial, and it's a positive trial. So right now, hopefully it's a phase 3 trial, phase 2-3 trial. So hopefully now we'll have a new indication for patients that literally have like 2 or 3 treatment options, and that option can extend life. It doesn't get rid of the disease yet, but it also gives us something that we can build upon, combinations, things like that. So I was there, I joined WashU when the trial was just starting, and 6-7 years later, it's resulting, and we actually have a positive result that was just presented a few days ago. I couldn't be more excited to now have an extra drug that we can give to those patients. And, I think that's the one that comes to mind for now.
That's fantastic. The work you're both doing is so important, and obviously your pride shows that, which is really nice to see. I do want to know, one of our viewers asked a question, at what point can someone start a clinical trial? Does that depend on where they are with their particular care, or their, like you mentioned, all the other factors with their physical, attributes, things like that? How does that work?
So I think, there are definitely clinical trials for every aspect. So we even have sort of clinical trials for patients as their, quote, survivors, like they've finished all their treatments and they want to sort of get better, like in terms of fatigue. So we try like exercise trials, or we have, other sorts of interventions. Yoga comes to mind. So we have different trials also for if you have completed your treatments. Do you want to try something like that? In addition to any phase of therapy, from when you're upfront, just newly diagnosed, till unfortunately if the cancer comes back, or multiple lines later. I mean, there usually is a clinical trial, because we're fortunate at Siteman to have such a variety of clinical trials, like you keep mentioning. We have over 500 open. We have different phases of trials, like Dr. Trikalinos said. So we can probably find you a trial if you're motivated and want to participate.
And it is up to the patient to contact you, not the other way around, right?
Correct. What I
Yes.
usually tell people is think of it as catching a train. So when you're ready to go somewhere, you go to the train station. There may or may not be a train, or maybe multiple trains that take you different directions. If you go away and come back 5 minutes later, there may be nothing, or there may be, many more options. This is the clinical trial. Come to us when you're ready, when you're looking for something, and we'll make sure we'll look for something that applies to you.
That's a good
Now,
fit.
conversely, sometimes your physician or Dr. Thaker may feel, for example, that a clinical trial may be a very good fit for you. Then that's initiated by the physician, and you probably should listen to
Right,
them.
and I know you want to stress strongly, it is between you and your doctor to kind of take that path first and then go this route. Someone else asked a question, what about children? Do they participate in clinical trials?
That's a great question. So I'd say our pediatric colleagues who do oncology actually have much better participation on clinical trials because there definitely, unfortunately, are children who are afflicted with cancer. And so they do much better than adults. So I would say our pediatric colleagues would probably be up here being like, oh, we get 60 to 80% of our population, or maybe even more. And in adult medicine, it's far less. So, I think part of it is, as adults, we make different decisions for ourselves and everything like that, but also it's just the education piece,
Right.
so people know about them more.
All right, we're going to get to our final part of our discussion now. We're going to talk about some of the misconceptions of clinical trials and perhaps even skepticism. Do you find that that is a thing as well? Are people skeptical of clinical trials sometimes?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that is definitely a big part of it. And that's why I feel like the education piece is so important because a lot of patients are worried that they're going to get nothing. Like the standard of care is going to be a placebo or nothing.
Different or reduced,
different.
right.
And so when we're mentioning about de-escalation, that means we think that you don't need as much therapy, and we think that's actually the new option. So I do think it's very important, and to let us know what those concerns are, because I think every patient comes with a unique set of circumstances. Because I definitely have patients who are like, I had my friend and she participated and it was a wonderful experience too. Oh my goodness, I think, I know someone who did not do well. So we can try to address it, but without an open dialogue, it's really hard to address fears or skepticism. But I would reassure everyone that there's a lot of safety measures. As long as you love talking with us, we love talking with you.
That is so
I
true.
can tell.
That is so
Right,
true.
because our team wants to talk and hear from you as well. So, a lot of times that's why I said it's also important to bring who are your trusted advisors, because when you're so overwhelmed with, how you may be feeling, taking in all this information, because it can be a lot of information. So we do have written information we give patients so they don't feel pressurized that they had to make a decision. We usually encourage patients to take it home, read it through, then come back to us, and either someone from our staff, like coordinators or research assistants, can answer, or even the physician again, because it's not a decision that you just say, today I'm going to do this. You have to really take your time and look into it and make sure it's right for everyone in your life, in addition to yourself.
Okay. Dr. Trikalinos, I want to ask you, if somebody isn't sure how to get started, where do they start? I mean, if they're watching this right now and they have a doctor's appointment, take us through the steps.
So if someone is interested in exploring some more options, they can always refer to their own physician and ask, is there any option for a clinical trial, either here or at Siteman? As we mentioned before, you can directly call us or email us or, reach through our phone numbers. You can reach us on social media. Some people get referred through relatives or other patients that we know. I don't think we're that hard to reach. It's more about making that first step towards initiating that discussion, and we're here to help. This is I cannot stress that enough. Obviously the trial is a commitment, but it's a commitment that's a voluntary commitment. You're lending us some of your time, and we're helping you. We're trying to help you. And once someone gets that, I think it's easier to initiate a communication.
And when somebody does make that step, does that make you hopeful? Are you hopeful for where all of it's going with clinical trials?
Oh, I'm very excited. I used to be in community oncologist, good salary. I was living in DC. I mean, I'm here, in an academic center with much I mean, much lower salary, but it's because we're excited. We like to discover, we like to make things better. I always feared that I would be very average. I would be very good at many things, but not really good at something. So when you're in an academic center, when you have, very talented physicians next to you, and when you have the options of clinical trials, trying something new, improving upon what is already known, that's what's exciting. And over the years, we've been excited about certain things. We've been disappointed about other trials. We occasionally run into some scuffles, but the joy. I mean, you should be around when we discuss, patient outcomes. When we have our weekly meetings with the research coordinators. When someone is doing extremely well, they stop short of clapping. They're just excited. I've seen research coordinators cry when someone is not doing well, or when something doesn't work for them. But we're all humans. We all come from families where cancer may be prevalent. We all have lost people, but most of all, we're just excited to learn and obviously to teach. So
I would say the word is definitely hopeful then. Very
Yes.
good. Dr. Thaker, I want to ask you, for anybody watching this, what do you think, based on our discussion that we've had over the last number of minutes, what is the take-home message? What is the one thing you want people to understand and absorb and take home with them after hearing this discussion?
Sure. I think the main take-home message is that we are optimistic, we're hopeful, and we feel like with better science and clinical trials, we'll continue to do better and better, and that you really should discuss this option. I think one of the things that we didn't mention is that a lot of times patients are fearful if they bring it up with their treating physician, that they might be like, oh my goodness, you're not trusting me. But I know the oncology community is very strong and passionate about clinical trials. So at some point, it probably isn't part of everyone's journey to really want to inquire about it. Now, what part of that journey that happens, if it's up front, when they first get diagnosed, or when it comes back, I think it's really empowering for patients to sort of have that open dialogue, because sometimes also their physician may be hesitant if they don't have a clinical trial to say, let me give you to someone else, because they don't want the patient to feel like they're being abandoned by someone who took care of them. So I think that's also an important part, that it's, we're all here as a team, and we're hopefully going to help be a better team if we all work together.
Some incredible information and a great discussion. I thank you very much for tonight. That wraps up tonight's discussion. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time to join us tonight, Dr. Nikolas, Trikalinos, and Premel Thaker. Thank you both so much for your time this evening. And don't miss our next Siteman Learning with National Leaders discussion. Expert panelists will join us to talk about cancer. Come right back here to this site to sign up for more events happening soon in 2024. Meanwhile, we invite you to visit yourdiseaserisk.com to learn about your risk of 12 cancers and other chronic diseases, and to get personalized tips for preventing them. As always, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Randy Naughton. Have a good night.